So good evening, everyone. My name is Brady Plunger, and I am one of the Associate Curators of Education at the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art. It is my privilege to welcome you all to tonight's talk, the second in our series celebrating this year's Grant Wood Fellows. Before we begin, I would like to thank our partners in presenting this talk, the Grant Wood Art Colony, the Provost's Office, and the School of Art and Art History. I would be remiss if I did not also thank all of our friends of the Stanley Museum, and especially Yvonne McCabe, sponsor of the Stanley's virtual programming this year. Let me say just a brief word about housekeeping before I introduce tonight's guest. We have live captioning for tonight's program, and you may activate those closed captions by bringing your cursor down to the bottom of your Zoom window and clicking the little square button labeled CC. And we will have a live Q&A tonight at the end of the talk, and you may submit questions at any time during the program. So feel free, you can open up that Q&A box also on that lower toolbar and submit your questions. And if you experience any technical difficulties tonight, you may reach out to my Stanley colleague, Joshua Siefkin, using the chat box, and he will assist you. And if it's too serious for Josh, then you might just have to get a new computer, who can say? It is my honor tonight to introduce Grant Wood Fellow, Elena Smyrniotis, and I'm going to learn to say it because I have to say it several more times. Elena is a printmaking and installation artist with a background in architecture. Her work explores literary and historical utopian ideas through contemplations on the utopian landscape, with a particular focus on architecture, topography, and cartography. She earned an MFA in printmaking from the University of Notre Dame, an MA in printmaking and drawing from the University of St. Francis, and an MA in architecture and engineering from the State Petroleum University in Russia. Smyrniotis's extensive international experiences include a fellowship at the Rome Global Gateway, research with the Rome Capitoline Museum and the Hertziana Library and Geographical Society in Italy, teaching printmaking workshops at the Gems Metropolitan School in Dubai, and participation in workshops at the Painting School of Montmiral in France. She is also the founder and director of the Art and Architecture School for Children in Ufa, Russia, and has worked as an architect in St. Petersburg. Please join me from wherever you are in welcoming Elena Smyrniotis. And clap, everyone, clap. She'll feel the vibes. That's what we found with Margarita last month. We just clap and we feel the vibes.
Brady, I thank you for your wonderful words, and thanks to everyone who can be here tonight. I'm very happy to be in Iowa City, and I'm especially happy to be a part of the Grant Wood Art Colony and member of a wonderful printmaking family of the University of Iowa. Today, I would like to follow my course as an artist and take a look at some of my experiences that are formative to what I am as an artist today. I will talk about a few bodies of work, and I will try to stop at the end of each section so if, in case you have questions or comments.
Oh, we might have just, oh, perfect.
I was brought up in Russia during Cold War, when travel to the other parts of the world was impossible, with a few exceptions. I grew up reading adventure novels about sea travels, where the island was very important and desirable destination. I became fascinated by the mystery of remote places that enticed travelers to take dangerous journeys in search of an ideal land. My interest was not about exoticizing particular places or people colonized by Europeans. My interest was more about imaginary possibilities, about the place that does not exist, and mostly about expanding the existing space. Later in my life, this quest for the discovery became motivation for my artwork. This video is a part of a Horizons of Utopia project, created as an imaginary journey through the islands. Islands for me are places that combine materiality and metaphor, and offer spaces that appear at once open and closed, fixed and fluid, defenseless and resilient, seductive and dangerous. I focus on metaphor of space, allegorical representation of utopia, and emulation of the landscape through cartography and topography. Landscapes in my work have different degrees of association with real world. They represent intellectual wisdom over spaces and serve as an escape from the mundane in the fantastic place of utopia. I grew up in a big city in the center of Russia, in a district where all buildings looked identical to each other. The dominant color of my neighborhood was gray, no matter the season. Living close to the big train station, I like to look through the window at the trains passing by and imagine places where this train can possibly take me. My mother used to collect art catalogs and postcards that showed different places around the world. And when I was little, my favorite occupation was to go through these postcards and reproductions and let my imagination take me to the beautiful places and letting me participate in what was happening in the picture. I remember dazzling cities, beautiful garden, and unusually dressed people that looked very different from what I saw in my everyday life. One of my favorite reproductions was Bosch's The Garden of Earthy Delights, the landscape populated by oversized fruit, fantastic animals, and hybrid stone formations. I was hypnotized with unusual semi-organic flower-shaped architectural forms. These art reproductions became a window to a different world that existed somewhere far away and that could only be reached in my fantasies. While studying architecture and engineering at the Petroleum State University in Ufa, Russia, I founded and directed experimental architectural art school for children. Since that moment, teaching became one of the most inspiring experiences for me. I used progressive play-based methods of teaching that encouraged development of children's imagination and creativity. It was a very valuable experience for me since child's imagination was a part of my own artwork. I became an architect and moved to St. Petersburg, Russia. During the difficult decade of 1990s, my architectural practice became impossible due to economic crisis and closure of architectural companies. I had a few very interesting art-related jobs during that time that included designing exhibitions for the museums, teaching art classes, collaborating with sculptors on public projects, and working at the Petropol Art Gallery, which was a part of the Hermitage State Museum in St. Petersburg. The instability of the world around me forced me to keep seeking for the ideal place of safety and security. At the end of 1990s, I immigrated from Russia. I arrived to Indiana in 2000 to begin a new life. I decided to change my career path and got my master's degree in printmaking and drawing. Indiana offered me a space and time to reflect on my past experiences. Horizontality of Indiana made me to seek out verticality of urban space and resulted in new body of artwork. My affair with printmaking began with monotypes. The style of my work was triggered by expressive possibilities of the monotype technique, which allowed me to focus on texture, color, and emotion. The monotype technique allows a very short time to work on the plate and thus encourages the artist to improvise and to be more spontaneous. It permits a more intuitive and immediate connection between the artist's hand and her thoughts during a short process of creation. During these years, I created a body of artwork that focuses on exploring history, place, and personal narrative in the setting of the big city. This work is based on my own life experiences, where the city is not only a backdrop for the unfolding stories, but an active character. These are some monotypes from Urban Disaster series. This series is about calamities in both political and private life that I experienced in 1990s in Russia. I use images of architectural chaos, where elements of the city environment collide with forces of nature, creating an atmosphere of disaster. The city's destruction does not mean real physical damage, but rather reflects turbulences of that time. The disaster series reflects my thoughts about experiences of metropolis and human existence in general, filled with sentiments of alienation and global problems. This body of work finds inspiration in German expressionist movie sets, Fritz Lang's Metropolis in particular. The story of Metropolis developed in the urban environment. Fritz Lang used unrealistic sets, theatrical compositions, and designs that externalized characters' thoughts. German expressionist themes were rather dark and mysterious to reflect the mentality and social conditions of that time. A similar social context characterized my life during the crisis in 1990s, when due to economic chaos and sense of cultural crisis, people were losing their hopes for the future. Similar to German expressionism films, my disaster series emphasizes the sinister side of a given historical period, characterized by social instability and emotional insecurity. My work was influenced by the Russian avant-garde art and underground thoughts art as well. I used methods of poster art to flatten surfaces. I involved geometry, diagonal elements, limited palette, and stencil-looking images of monumental architecture. The next step in my education was getting my MFA from University of Notre Dame, where I developed as a multidisciplinary artist. Is there any questions so far or comments?
Yes.
No?
I'm sorry, my sound came so intense there. Yes, we actually do have two questions related to the urban disaster series, and I also have a question, but I'll start with the attendee questions first. So first, from an anonymous attendee, we have, out of all the places in the United States you could have chosen, what brought you to Indiana?
Well, in United States, from my experience, in United States, people live where they have jobs, not where they want to live. So this is what happened to my family.
Yes, that is very, as someone who grew up moving around for parents' jobs, I can relate to that in a big way. And I think many of us can, moving for jobs or education.
Yeah. Indiana is my home, is my base, and living in Indiana, I have an opportunity to travel around the world.
That's fantastic. And I noticed specifically, as I was reviewing your CV and things, being at Notre Dame, could you comment on that briefly? Like, what is, at being an artist at Notre Dame versus being an artist at Iowa? Do you find commonalities, or are they very different experiences?
It's just, well, it's Midwest, right? I just find that there is a printmaking community here that I really enjoy to be a part of, and it was just different community at the Notre Dame. But there is a lot of similarities. It's also a big bubble
Yeah.
of academia where everything is wonderful. But once you leave this bubble, well, you have to face the world.
Absolutely. And we have a question from James. Could you comment on your choice of color schemes in the urban disaster series?
Well, I was thinking about very limited palette of Russian poster art. There's a lot of red, a lot of black, some brown, and a little bit of yellow and white.
Those are fantastic. I'm thinking of, like Tatlin or someone like that, those incredible posters, or the sort of, or even Russian suprematism, like those simple punchy colors and harsh lines.
Exactly. I was looking a lot at Kazimir Malevich, at El Lisitsky, Rodchenko, and Tatlin is my all-time favorites.
Oh, these are some of my favorite artists too. Malevich is just absolutely one of my favorites. And if folks in the audience aren't familiar, look these folks up, because their work is unbelievable, and also very, very exciting and different than what you might be familiar with in America or in France at the same time. And I had one quick question about the urban disaster series before we move on. In what ways do you see the city as an active participant, in these works, or in the lives of sort of the people that inhabit it?
Well, as an architect, I see city as a living organism, and it is. It has its own way to grow and develop, and I specifically like city, urban spaces with a lot of history. I I loved city of St. Petersburg, where you can just walk down the street, and every stone, every building will tell you a story. So for me, city is a living organism.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say, personally, St. Petersburg is a city that's always captured my imagination. And I'm currently, with our City of Literature here in Iowa City, I'm reading Tolstoy's War and Peace. And of course, St. Petersburg and Moscow as well are major characters themselves in that book. So I'm really connecting with what you're saying on a personal level.
If you are really interested in descriptions of St. Petersburg atmosphere in 19th century, you need to read Dostoevsky. He really described the city really well in his novels.
I think I'll be ready for some Dostoevsky after I finish with Tolstoy. So thank you for the suggestion. I'll stop talking now and let you get back to you know, your talk.
Okay, thank you. One of the first series that I created at University of Notre Dame was Señorita Extraviada. This series focused on particular geographical location, just like urban disasters. This work is completed in a monotype technique on a digital background with elements of embroidery and three-dimensional textile work. The map with superimposed deconstructed dress evocates the mystery of disappeared body. This project is focusing on the event of feminicide in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. It illuminates multiple issues around Mexican-American border, including the role of NAFTA in the expansion of maquiladora industry. The practices of maquiladora, the practices of devaluation of women's labor on maquiladoras created disposable women workers and directly affected gendered violence. Most of the maquiladoras are part of the textile industry where sewing and embroidery are the majority of the production. This is why I use embroidery, sewing, and attach fibers of the dresses to the map. I let the thread to wander around and follow imaginary path of missing woman. The items of clothes are printed in natural size and are very personal and touchy. The deconstruction of the dress speaks to the deconstruction of the human body. They are evidence of instability of the world that led to the tragedy. This series of work echoed my personal narrative of a female in urban environment, except the story of these women didn't end well and they didn't get to escape. This project brought cartography into my work for the first time. In my next body of work, I reconstruct family memories from the materials found in my family archives. This work takes me back to the interior space of the old apartment in St. Petersburg where I used to live. Once when I was stripping old wallpaper from the walls of my apartment, I found around 15 layers of wallpaper and old newspapers between them. The newspapers were used as a liner between layers of wallpaper. The newspaper on the oldest layer was dated from 1930s. I was able to read articles and see faces of people who became forgotten long time ago. I felt like these layers represent physical evidence of the decades of history of the country. This made me think about history of my own family in relation to the history of the country as we know it. Blacklist series outline the essential role of personal memories as an alternative to the memories that are constructed and represented as a history. It takes me back to the 1930s era of political repressions that affected my family. The portraits of my family members are placed against the wallpaper background to create an illusion of domestic space, an evocation undercut by the way other elements, incisions, voids, and sutures suggest instability and danger. All portraits on this series are females because most of the stories about my family were told by the females. It was difficult stories about revolution, repressions, war, evacuation, and loss of family members. Blacklist series involved digital media, cut-out techniques, collage, and physical separation of printed layers. The images of old newspapers found in my apartment can be seen under the layers of wallpaper through the cutouts. This is a portrait of my mother and her cousin on a digitally created background. The propaganda poster of Stalin holding a happy child on front side of the locket, juxtaposed with images of blacklist inside, the list of the victims executed during the repressions or sent to the forced labor camps in Siberia called Gulag. The family members of the girls were among those victims. The Tea Party reflects on a particular event during repressions in 1920s, 1930s, when some people's faces were erased from the history books and photographs. These were photographs of people who fell out of grace. The physical eradication of the political opponents was followed by their obliteration from the all forms of pictorial existence. This work is about a void in the history, not only as a result of elimination of some powerful people, but also members of my family and many other families whose relatives had vanished and whose perspectives were never heard. The writing behind the obscuring layers of paper, crumbling tiles, and absence of faces symbolize a history disappearing, replaced by the history constructed by the people in power. The End of Utopia is echoing my urban disaster series of monotypes. They reflect on my experiences in 1990s, witnessing collapse of the system. It introduces allegorical representation of this event in a form of an urban landscape on a collaged map. The composition of End of Utopia is built in the shape of waves. The topographical relief develops into three-dimensional space, exploding with a blown-up tire at the top. The bottom part of installation embodies the utopia, represented by the idyllic cityscape that is slowly being corrupted by the dark wave. The utopian cityscape represents an attractive and organized space inhabited by the clusters of flesh-colored buildings. The terminology we use to describe city structures often reminds terminology used to define human body. For instance, we can say the heart of the city or main artery of the city. We compare streets and roads to the capillaries and rivers to the veins of the city. My idyllic landscape has a clear reference to the human body and represents an actual human experience. The black wave is invading the utopian landscape and causing dystopian changes. The cut-out pieces of map resemble a skeleton of the map, which is another reference to the human body. The masses of the land are shifting against each other like tectonic plates of the Earth's surface. The topography becomes a dynamic structure capable of communicating a variety of subjective experiences. Small traces of mini-utopias are escaping the scene of disaster to continue the cycle of transformation in a different place. This project illustrates porous boundaries between utopia and dystopia and continuous interchange between these two terms. Dramatically changing landscape indicates anxieties of the world we live in and a desire for an imaginary escape. I can stop for questions and comments.
Wonderful. So we have one question in from James, and everyone, as I said, you can feel free to throw questions in the Q&A as we're going along. But I feel like James and I are on the same wavelength here, because I was struck, almost struck dumb by the scale of this work and the textures and just the emotive force of it. And James says as well, these are very powerful emotive works. Could you talk about your process? Do you sketch, envision the work before you start, or does it evolve as you go?
Well, both actually. Sometimes you just have to show up at your studio. And sometimes, yes, definitely involves a lot of thinking, a lot of planning. Just like in any other body of work. And it's just, it was very natural to me to go bigger scale and in three-dimensional, way to create my artwork, because I feel like separating these layers of prints and creating more layers and combining more materials and mediums. I think it was very natural to me to just go into the sculpture. And it was sort of come back to working with space as I used to when I was an architect.
And I can say, all the works you've shown in this section, have such incredible tactile and architectural qualities to them. And stepping back from this piece for a moment, just to some of those pieces that you shared just a minute ago, dealing with your family and those ideas of people being erased from history. Yes, this one was one I was particularly thinking of. Can you talk about the delicacy that's at play here and just the time and focus that it takes to do this kind of work? Because I look at this and I certainly, don't know that I have, the stamina to do that, work on that scale and at such a, at such a number of pieces.
Well, when you dig into the project, it stopped being difficult and time consuming. When you have a purpose behind what you're doing, it's like, I feel like if I touch a gold mine, I just can't stop. And it just makes things easier and not time consuming, just enjoyable. I really enjoy a process of making. And this was a body of work that I enjoyed the process of making the most.
And I wonder if you could say too, just a moment or a quick word about the delicacy of these surfaces, because in the photos, they appear to be incredibly, fragile. And how do you live with these objects and move them and display them when they have such a delicacy to them?
Well, it's definitely very tempting, and it had happened when people just want to take a piece of tile. It's falling off anyway. So, and well, understandable. When I create this sort of work that is not protected, you just have to trust people to not to not to ruin it.
That is such a phenomenal statement. And it's so fun that we're having this talk as, you as a Grant Wood Fellow and me as a museum curator, because there's a good deal of trust, and that's what we want to do. Ultimately, we want to invite people in and trust and share. And these works, I could tell you, if I walked into a gallery and saw this work, I would be very tempted to touch it, certainly, because it also has such a wonderful tactile quality to it. And we do have one.
Sorry, I just want to make one quick comment. The tactility of my work comes from a very personal place, because this work is very personal and very fragile to me. So, and I want people to feel that this transparency and fragility and this like process of disappearing things.
That's really wonderful. You're inviting us all in such a beautiful way, and mirroring that in the construction of these works. And there is one more question about this work before we move on. An attendee is asking about the handwriting in the background. They pointed it out, and maybe you could say a word more about that.
Well, this is actual story of my family that I was writing based on stories of my great aunt. So I just wrote this story and I covered it up that you can barely see it, to symbolize that story is disappearing.
So all of that is handwritten.
Yes, it's handwritten on the back side. I actually it was written on transparency and burned onto the screen and silk screened. This is how it was done.
Wow. This is, and again, it just adds another layer, and it's just, the process is so engrossing, and you know, the intimacy of the work and of the materials and techniques that you're using is just really astounding. So I will stop talking again, because I could ask you a million more questions, but this is wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I will continue. These mini utopias that escaped from the scene of disaster in my End of Utopia project became utopian islands in my next project, Horizons of Utopia. This project represents a journey through the islands, where island is a metaphor for utopia. Horizons of Utopia embodies my childhood dreams of travel to the imaginary islands. These islands are formed from multiple layers of digitally printed and collaged maps. I made dozens of these models of the islands and used them to build sets for the video, which I played at the beginning of my presentation. This is the installation Horizons of Utopia at the State Museum of Art included large sculptures built from the layers and video projection onto the corner of the Mastrovich Gallery. This is the same video that you saw at the beginning of the presentation. The idea of layered sculptures came to me during my fellowship in Rome, where I studied maps of Rome and observed archaeological excavations that revealed layers of history and architecture. One of the examples that inspired me was Basilica di San Clemente, that contains more than 2,000 years of history. 12th century basilica rests on 4th century basilica, which rests on structures built in 1st century BC. My idea of layered sculptures speaks to reconstructing and excavating of layers of untold or forgotten history. Layered City of Rome brought up memories of layers of wallpaper in my old St. Petersburg apartment and made me think about gaps in the history of my own family, since it was never recorded. The large flat piece of Horizons of Utopia represents a landscape and a map at the same time. There is a big opening in the shape of lake in the middle of the piece with infinity glass inside that creates infinite reflections, repetitions of layers. The map is silk screened with invisible ink and exposed to the black light. The tiles of the gallery floor have maps printed on top as well. In this work, I involve geography and geology to focus on the Earth's surface and to think about our relationship with Earth's surface. I see the landscape as a work in progress that was erased many times over history of Earth. Everything we see is a result of evolution, and any human interaction can have disastrous consequences that can cause a dystopian change. My fascination with geology comes from my school hikes to the Ural Mountains led by our school geography teacher. During these 1-2 week trips, we were studying earth formations and collected examples of stones, crystals, and fossils. My interest in geology was enhanced by the places I visited during my travels, where I saw layered formations of earth. I specifically was interested in caves because I think they are the places for hiding mysteries of the earth. And they can answer a lot of questions of the past. These experiences influenced my next project named Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a site-specific installation with elements of sculpture, light, shadows, reflections, and infinity effects. The installation is designed as a journey through the space, while space slowly reveals itself. Labyrinth contains of 5 sculptures, compositionally and conceptually connected. Each sculpture has different character and conveys different movement in space. The sculptures are built from repeated layers to evoke images of architectural structures, geological formations, and layers of sedimentation of Earth. The space of installation has a tangible sensation of cave. The sculptures are constructed from the layers pulled away from each other and separated by spacers. The inner structures are revealed or obscured depending on angle and height of observation. As you move through the gallery space, this angle is always changing and negative spaces between the layers become exposed. The sculptures look solid from a distance. However, at a closer observation, you become aware of layers being suspended and hollow inside. The edge of each layer resembles a topographical line, which repeats itself many times throughout the space of installation. The labyrinth contains material and immaterial elements. The space is overtaken by the effects of shadows and light. The lights are attached to the walls and ceiling of the gallery, and some of them are placed in between the layers to cast the shadows onto the walls. These shadows are designed to be a continuation of the sculptures and to form landscape-like images on the walls. Presence of light, shadows, and infinity reflections expands the space of the gallery and provoke conversation between material and immaterial elements of the installation, as of between dream and reality. I began teaching when I was 20, when I founded experimental architectural school for the children. And teaching is still important practice for me that motivates my art practice. My approach to teaching is multidisciplinary, just as I do my art making. I welcome cross-disciplinary experiences in my classroom, such as this improvised body movement class in response to the color, shape, and energy of a particular work of art. I still embrace working with kids because child's creativity is a part of my own artwork. Recently, I taught an international printmaking workshop to the students of Gems Metropolitan School in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. This is all I got. I'm ready for your questions.
All right, everyone. Feel free to throw some questions into the Q&A box. I had one thinking specifically kind of about materials and processes. You know, the evolution from some of the, like Tea Party, for instance, to Labyrinth, it's, you know, very different. And I wonder if you could just talk about that evolution in materials and even colors and textures.
Well, I think this evolution happened here or was provoked by the way I go from like personal themes in my artwork to some like more existential problems. It seems like I'm always zooming into something and then I'm zooming out of something just to see a bigger picture and bigger landscape. And I think the scale of my work is dictated by this process, depending on the task that I have in mind. And definitely the colors are changing.
And I wonder, as a quick follow-up to that, could you talk at all about or speak to an evolution in maybe process and techniques that you're using? Are there changes there that are sort of mirroring what the changes that we see in the colors and the materials?
Well, I use the same method of layering. You know, as a printmakers, we're thinking layers when we work on a specific print. And this is actually the same method that I use to build my sculptures, if you think about it. And this is the same method I use to create my blacklist series when I use up to 6 layers of different paper and I cut through to reveal bottom layers. So reveal, that's another keyword. This is what I do with my layers. I build them, but then I sort of pull them apart to reveal what's inside. And for me, it's the space for the mystery, the space. It's a process of uncovering something, learning something.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience, from James. In the installation projection, it was cast onto a corner to create a symmetry, and the works behind you are symmetric. Can you say something about symmetry? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to read that sentence again. Can you say something about symmetry in your concept of utopia?
Well, actually, it wasn't, well, the video that was cast onto the corner of the gallery, yes, it was symmetrical and it was projected onto the space and it created a movement like a wave-like movement into the corner and out of the corner. And this video represented idea of utopia. And I chose this medium of video because this is a very ephemeral medium, video. Like, you know, you push the button and it disappears. And the physical part of the installation, Horizons of Utopia, it wasn't symmetrical, actually. It was actually what you see right now. It's big map and with a missing corner. And the sculpture that is nearby, that tall tower, has shape of this missing corner, but it's much higher. It's, I think it's about 11 or 12 feet high, and it represented like some dramatic collapse of the surface. And the viewer can stand between these two pieces and experiences being above the Earth's surface and see this landscape, and at the same time be under the surface when he will look around at this tall tower. So it was just, well, it wasn't exactly symmetrical, but these two pieces represented dystopia. And also inside this lake and inside this infinity reflections, there was utopian islands that I used to create the video. They were sort of trapped in between the layers and repeated many times. So I always have this idea of continuous interchange between these two terms, like one cannot exist without another, and one is the beginning of another.
Incredible. And as I'm looking at this slide again, I'm so drawn in by these you know, the waterways and things. And I wonder, you know, just briefly, because we do have another participant question coming in, but could you talk a little bit about where you find inspiration for these kind of maps and topographies that you create specifically? Like, do you have an atlas you open up, or, you know, where does that come from?
Well, some of them mean something to me. Some of the maps. Some of the maps are collaged from different places that I have visited, and they're special to me. But mostly this is collected image. It's not something specific. This is dystopia. This is the product of you know, fantasy. Yeah, but other elements, like when you work on specific theme and, you know, one thing, you know, follows another and is logical step. For example, this opening in the middle of this surface resembles an island. When you look at it, it resembles an island, but in the shape of void, like an opposite shape. Mm-hmm. You cannot see it at the picture because it was very difficult to take pictures when in the dark space. I didn't have right equipment. So, but this is, this void resembles an opposite of an island, which is embedded in this piece of dystopia.
Thank you. And moving to, we actually had a couple questions come in. So from Anna, could you talk a little more about scale? How does the way viewers interact with your pieces relate to the concept of the human relationship with land and also cities?
How my concept interact? Can you repeat it, please, the second?
Sure, absolutely. Could you talk a little more about scale? How does the way viewers interact with your pieces relate to the concept of the human relationship with land and with cities? So I guess scale in general, how does it play into?
Let's talk about the scale first. First, I start with space that I am going to operate with. And depending on this space, I'm thinking about how can I convey my idea in this particular space. So this is site-specific composition, installation. So when I knew I have this space and I immediately knew what would be the size of my work, and I wanted to go really big scale, like epic scale. I'm talking about epic terms of utopian, dystopia, and I wanted to go bigger scale. You know, why not? Maastricht's gallery was somewhere 55 by almost 30 feet. It was a big space, and I thought this big sculptures will be very impressive. And I do like to work in big scale, if you noticed from the size of my prints. I just, for some reason, I think they're more effective. And when you're talking about installation, I think large scale is more effective because it's like it envelops you, and the spectator becomes a part of the installation, and you can't just avoid. No, it just traps you in this space, and you have no choice but be a part of this installation.
I love that, and that dovetails so well into two more questions we have from the audience. From Jonathan Payne, we have, I'm curious about the way both physical and compositional space are engaged in the work. The Labyrinth installation is a protrusion and an
Starting with my very early experiences. So it's always lounging for space, finding extra space, creating extra space. So this is why I use the methods that I use. So I'm creating illusory space through infinity mirrors. So I have infinite extension of the space of my labyrinth. I use light. So when I use light and shadows, the physical dimensions of the space are changing. The walls are sort of disappearing and like moving farther, overtaken by these effects of light. And video is also a very illusory method. It brings a lot into the space. It creates absolutely different space.
And I love this all, again, ties back to so beautifully what you said before, thinking about the space and how the viewer enters the space and they kind of cannot but interact with the piece. And Anita, hi Anita, Anita asked about the space in the room, and I think you sort of answered this, but she's just thinking about how do these, the walls and the floor, how do these envelop the participant within the space when they're in the space with your work?
Well, it's not the walls over space. That's what I do to the space that guides a viewer through the space by the way I use the light, and by the way I cast shadows onto the walls, and by the colors that I use and music that I use. It's almost, I was trying to create a space that kind of invites you in, and you just want to turn over the corner. It's actually a very simple space, but there is a L-shaped space, and I'm just sort of trying to lure people, into the corner where they find the infinity surprise, and they see another labyrinth.
Fantastic. And I'll just let everyone know we've been asking Elena an awful lot of questions and we're coming up on time, but I wanted to just there's a question from an attendee here, and then I'll use there's two other questions that I think we'll kind of sandwich together really quickly. But these bodies of work are so powerful and different in terms of scale and subject matter, yet there seem to be some common themes that connect personal and national and global histories. Could you say just a little bit more about that?
Of course, they are connected. We all are connected to each other and to the history. And this is what I started with. I started with personal themes and digging into the history of my family, then into the history of the country, and then all this, I kind of zoomed out on everything and I started thinking about the Earth probably in general, and our relationship to the Earth's surface, and what do we do exactly to this surface, and and all this is just themes that I think about when I create my artwork.
Thank you. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, because I care what happens to the world around, to the landscape. Yeah.
That's an important sentiment, and I'm sorry that I almost cut it off, because it reminds me of something that Lucy Lepard said in a talk. She said, you have an immense responsibility to the place where you are. And I think that I love the way that you think about kind of a parallel concept and just really caring about what's going on and kind of engaging with these, to use your own title, urban disasters, which many of our cities frankly are urban disasters. So from Mora, of course, to bring us home, could you talk about how you are showing your work this year? How will people be able to see your work in person?
I have an exhibition upcoming in Cedar Rapids at the Czech Cultural Center. The exhibition will be open from the end of May until the end of August. So there is plenty of time to come and see my installation.
Thank you. And finally, Terry and Jonathan are both dying to know about the prints behind you. So if you could say a quick word about the prints behind you.
This is few bodies of work that I am in process of making. This body of work is based on photographs that were taken inside the labyrinth, space of the labyrinth, manipulated in the Photoshop, and some of them are printed digitally, some of them are silk screened, and it's not a final product. They're still hanging on the wall and curing. And the other series of work called Air Castles, and this body of work is about my memories of the spaces that I remember from my past.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Everybody from wherever you are, please give a big round of applause to Elena. Thank you so much for taking our questions and conversation, especially my many questions. I'm very grateful to you. And it was so exciting to think through this work and to spend time hearing from you tonight. I want to let everyone know that we have one last talk coming up. We have with Jonathan Payne in April, which will be our last in our 3 lectures celebrating the Grant Wood Fellows. So be sure to stick around for that and keep an eye out for information about their exhibitions. because clearly there is going to be a lot of fantastic stuff to see. And what does the world need right now, if not incredible, engrossing art? And especially, I love this thinking about infinity. I feel like that's what I want to do right now. So thank you all so much. Have wonderful evenings. Stay well, stay safe, and join us next month for Jonathan's lecture. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Brady.
It was my pleasure, truly, to get to talk about Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and the suprematists. This was fabulous.
Thank you for remembering about those guys, because they kind of got forgotten. And like when people talking about Chinese poster art, they don't talk about where it came from, and it's I kind of wanted to bring it up to remind.
Well, if you ever want to have a Tatlin parade or something, I'll be right there with you. We'll do it together. We'll bring them back.
Sounds
good. All right. Well, I'm going to go.
Make sure you wear your jacket.
Yes, I promise. Maybe I'll wear a different one. I'll find one that's more suprematist.
Sounds great.
With maybe just a black triangle on it or something. We'll
I will wear Tatlin's tower on as my,
Yes. Yes. Oh, this is wonderful. We've got a plan. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you all soon.